focus less on the content and more on the art of behavior change if you really want to make a difference.
Do you want to impact the world and still turn a profit? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to Growth Everywhere. This is the show where you'll find real conversations with real entrepreneurs. They'll share everything from their biggest struggle to the exact strategies they use on a daily basis. So if you're ready for a value-packed interview, listen on. Here's your host, Eric Siu.
Before we jump into today's interview, if you guys could leave a review and a rating and also subscribe as well, that would be a huge help to the podcast. So if you actually enjoy the content and you'd like to hear more of it, please support us by leaving us a review and subscribe to the podcast as well. Thanks so much.
Okay, everyone. Today we have Michael Bungay Stanier, who is the founder of Box of Crayons and the author of The Coaching Habit, which is a program that teaches 10-minute coaching to busy managers. I think that's Box of Crayons, and The Coaching Habit is a book that kind of expands upon that. So I'll let Michael actually explain that in a second. But Michael, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So why don't you give us a little background on kind of what your story is?
Yeah, sure. So look, I'm Australian. I now live in Canada. So how the hell did I get to Canada? Well, I left Australia 25 years ago. I'd done a law degree and a BA in Australia. I was lucky enough to win a Rhodes Scholarship. That took me to England. It did two wonderful things for me. One, it stopped me becoming a lawyer, which would have been depressing for everybody involved. And I met my Canadian wife there. So she was doing a PhD at Oxford. So I stayed in England, started my career in the world of innovation and creativity, moved to change management. At this stage, I don't like living in England because it's cold and grey and damp too much of the time. So we moved to Boston, lived in Boston for a while, moved to Toronto about 17 years ago. And I started Box of Crayons shortly after that. It started off in that classic, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'll do a bit of everything. But over the years, it's found its focus. And just as you said in the introduction, what we are now is a training company. We teach 10-minute coaching to busy managers so they can build better teams and get better results.
Love it. Okay, great. So yeah, I want to talk about, I guess, the 10-minute coaching. Well, how did you get to this point? You said you were trying a bunch of things in the beginning. What kind of things were you trying in the beginning? You're just throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah, my business model was if it has a pulse and a wallet, I'm interested in that conversation. And I had just enough knowledge through a bunch of things I'd done, around creativity, around strategy, around communication, around market research, around branding. I could turn my hand to a bunch of different things. And you might know the metaphor that Jim Collins talks about in one of his books, The Good to Great Guy. He says, look, to build a good strategy, you want to fire bullets and then you want to fire cannonballs. And knowing what those are really makes a difference. Bullets are like your tests. They're relatively cheap. They're relatively risk-free. But your bullets allow you to find your target. Once you've found your target, you want to have the courage to fire the cannonballs, to kind of commit to that. And what he says is that for most people, they either fire their cannonballs too soon. In other words, they go, look, I think this is my idea. I'm just going to put everything into it and hope that it works. Or they fire their cannonballs too late or not at all. They found their target, but they don't have the nerve to commit to the idea that they've figured out actually works. And, this is all in retrospect. I wasn't smart enough to know this at the time, but at Box of Crayons, I spent a lot of time firing bullets. But then when I figured out that coaching and helping people be more coach-like, because I'm not really about training people to be coaches, but to be more coach-like is a subtle but important difference. I'm like, that really matters. That's going to make the world a better place. Secondly, I have an opinion on how to do that that's different from other people's approach to training coaching, so I can find a way to make myself stand out from the field. And thirdly, there's a market for this. There's people who will pay me to actually bring this new approach to thinking about coaching into the market. You've got that holy trinity, a point of difference, a degree of passion, and a market. So that's when we really started to focus on that at Box of Crayons. And that's why we've got this singular focus right now.
Love it. And how long did it take you to get to this focus?
Well, we're 15 years old as a company, and certainly for at least the first 5 years, I was flapping around doing a bunch of things. Coach training was part of it, but it was just one of a portfolio of different things that I offered. I would say that we're probably doing this pretty much exclusively for 7 years. And probably for the last 4 years, we've gone, actually, this is all we talk about. 4 years ago, I used to say that the purpose of Box of Crayons was to help people and organizations do less good work and more great work. So good work is like your job description. Great work is the work that has more impact and more meaning. And people like that, but it's a bit vague. And now when you hear me talk about Box of Crayons and I go, we teach 10-minute coaching so busy managers can build stronger teams and get better results. It's just completely unambiguous about what we do. So people are like, I want to talk to you, or I'm not at all interested in talking to you, which is either one of those are good results.
Got it. Love it. So I do want to talk about, let's talk about Box of Crayons a little bit. So how do you make money?
So we make our money through our training program. So we teach managers and leaders within organizations about how to be more coach-like. And so we have, where we have clients around the world, mostly in North America, but they range from let's say TD Bank, one of the big banks in Canada and into the US. Gucci, we've just started working with Gucci, headquartered around the world and headquartered in Italy. Box in the Silicon Valley was a client of ours. Intuitive Surgical in Silicon Valley. It's a real mix, but they tend to be Fortune 1000 companies.
Got it. Okay, great. And so how much, give us an idea of kind of what the pricing structure looks like, and then kind of the average pricing.
Yeah, so we have worked really hard to stay really focused in what we offer because this is against my nature. Like I'm a kind of shiny object syndrome guy. So I'm like, oh, we could do this. Oh, here's another idea. But you've heard the focus that we have around our offering, our USP around the 10-minute coaching. And we actually only have 3 programs that we offer. So it's very clear, very limited. I'm trying to be Apple-esque in my focus. So we have 2 half-day programs and we have a one-day program. And so the 2 half-day programs, they go for $8,500 each for 12 to 40 people. And the one-day program, I'm not even sure what that goes for anymore because I'm not directly involved in the sales, but probably like 16,000, something like that.
Got it. Okay, sorry. So I got 16,000 just now, and the first one was?
8,500 for the half-day programs, of which we have 2. Yeah.
Great. And then what kind of numbers can you share around the business in terms of, customers, revenues, anything like that, growth rates?
Yeah. So we're in the $3 to $5 million in revenue range. We're actually on a growth tear at the moment. So last year we doubled in revenue, in part because of this book, The Coaching Habit, has really taken off, and it is a direct avenue into a conversation about our sales program. So this is secretly what I was hoping. Like I'm really thinking this will be my cool marketing tool that will help the business, but it's gone gangbusters. So yeah, we're in that, and we train about 20,000 managers a year through various formats.
Love it. Okay. Awesome. So when you say usually, if it's 20 to 40 people, I'm assuming like a Box, for example, they're just putting all their managers in because they want their managers to be better coaches. They do it for 1 to 2 days or 1 day or so, and then that's it.
Yeah, although we worry about the sustain. So a couple of things. One is there's an axiom in the training world that if you're just doing training, you're going to lose, because if you're stuck out on lonely training island, what happens is people, grudgingly go off to training, they do the training, and then they go back to their everyday work and they forget their training instantly. So you want to do a couple of things. One is you want training to be part of a bigger game, a small part of a bigger game. So you've got to connect it to something that the organization is up to, a challenge the organization is facing. So there's a reason for people to actually do this new thing that you're encouraging them to do. The other thing that's essential in training, particularly our stuff, which is about changing people's behavior, because the behavior change we want, Eric, is how do you help people stay curious a little bit longer and rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? Because most managers, most leaders are advice giving maniacs, particularly in industries where there's like a lot of technical knowledge. They're like, let's get into the answers. And we're like, answers are good, advice can be useful, but can we stay curious a little bit longer? And if you want people to change their behavior, and people are really well practiced at giving advice and they're not so well practiced at asking questions and staying curious, training doesn't do it. So we worry about the post-workshop sustainability. The way we put it is this: drip irrigation always beats a flash flood. And if your half-day training event is the flash flood, so it gets people kind of immersed, you've got to worry about the drip irrigation that keeps the soil moist for the next 3 or 4 months after that, so that people actually have an ability to remember and practice their new habits.
Right. So do you have a program afterwards that helps them do that?
Like we do a bunch of things to try and do that, because one single solution never works. So, in the program itself, people actually articulate 3 to 5 brand new habits that they're going to go out and practice. We set them up with accountability partners. We set them up so that they have a conversation with their manager. But the thing that's kind of most different in that we do is we have a text-based platform, so that 3 times a week, Monday morning, Wednesday morning, Friday afternoon, people get a short text that encourages them to engage and remember and connect to a commitment they have around one of the 7 key questions that we probably taught them in the workshop.
Awesome. So I do want to talk about the book, because the book is on fire, right? The fact that, here's the thing, I'll give you a little backstory around the book. So I went to Japan earlier, I guess in December 2017, and I had 2 books in my luggage, and then I remember hearing about your book before, and I had it sitting somewhere, and then I think I was watching some video from Pat Flynn as I was packing, and then Pat's like,
he loves this book, so he's a great champion for it.
Yeah, so he literally, that's what happened. Like, he's like, this is the book I recommend. And so I emailed him afterwards. I was like, you just changed basically you changed my trip, because I swapped out another book. So what happened was, as I was flying back, I read the entire thing. The books, I'm holding it right now. I have a bunch of things like dog-eared, but I read the whole thing in like one sitting. And it's changed everything, right? It's like the way, and I'm a total advice giver. Just the whole concept of like taking a step back and asking questions was completely new to me. But let's talk about this book. I mean, it became a Wall Street Journal bestseller. I'd say it's a success for you, because the fact that we're talking right now is because of this book. So how did you make it so successful? How did it take off?
Well, a combination of hard work and good luck, of course. So we're just about we're a week away from the book's 2nd birthday. So we've just been counting up the numbers of how many books sold. It's closing into 400,000 copies sold so far.
Wow.
And exactly, wow. And honestly, you don't sell that amount of books without just a little bit of lightning in a bottle, that blessing from the gods that everybody hopes for and rarely shows up. But we worked really hard to give this book the very best shot that we could. And it started with some key design principles right at the start. So one of the design principles I had was, what is the shortest book that I could write that would still be useful? Because I believe too many business books are kind of bloated and, they've just got too much stuff stuffed in them. And I'm like, I need this book to have a real elegance and a practicality to it. The second thing was, and this kind of ties in nicely with what you were saying, I went, look, this book, I'm designing this for it to be picked up in an airport bookstore. Somebody goes, oh, this looks actually pretty interesting. They flip it open and they go, wow, there's lots of white space. This feels accessible and not kind of overwhelming. And they can sit down and they can read it on an airplane flight. So accessible, practical, fast reading, not too scary. So there's that. Then we when you write a book, the general knowledge or the common assumption is to go, right, it's all about the launch. Make the launch huge, and you try and get your book onto a bestseller list, and then you collapse in exhaustion 2 weeks later, and then your book kind of vanishes without trace. Whereas what we did is we made a commitment to say we will be fully committed to marketing this book for a year, getting the book out into the world. And that involved, finding people and influencers and giving lots and lots of copies away. But one of the smart things we did is we basically went, who else has written a book that my target audience might have read? So, for instance, one of the books was Dan Pink's book, Drive, all about motivation. Terrific book. And what we did is we reverse engineered. We found out the 20 journalists, the highest ranked journalists who'd written articles and reviews of Dan's book. And then we pitched our book to them saying, hey, Dan Pink liked this book and you might like it as well. And it allowed us to get a much greater uptake amongst writers and bloggers and podcasters about the book than we might have done otherwise. And Eric, I mean, if people are super keen to find out all the marketing things that we did, I actually wrote a long article, like 7,000 words for Growth Lab. I think it's called How I Sold 180,000 Copies of My Book and Doubled My Business. And if they Google that and they're like, I just need to know all these tactics, in that article, I list all the things we did that worked, but also a bunch of things we tried that didn't work so well.
I remember reading that, actually. So how long did that entire process take? I don't want to go too much into weeds. We'll drop this in the show notes too. But yeah, how long did that entire process take? You said a year, but how long do you think it took for it to actually start to take off, where people started to say, okay, we'll write a review or whatever?
Yeah. So we launched the book on February the 29th, 2016. We had the book ready in October. The year before. So we actually had because we self-published, we had more control about how to manage this. So we spent 4 or 5 months seeding the market before its launch on February the 29th. And before that, it took me 3 years to write this book. I mean, it's really short. And people are like, it's so simple and straightforward. I'm like, hey, that's because it almost killed me to write this thing.
Right.
But, so from the start, it's like three years, a bit longer perhaps, to write it. But once we got the book written, then it took us 9 months to get in through the design process and the editing process. And then 5 months pre-launch seeding and reaching out and preparing that. And then just this ongoing commitment for a year and a half to just be on podcasts, write articles, talk endlessly about the book, which luckily, because I love the book, I don't mind doing.
It's just the same conversation over and over, huh?
Well, it's not totally the same conversation, but it's like there are some questions that I have asked a lot. I have answered a lot of times. I'm like, I know my answer to this question because I've said it before.
Yep. Got it. Okay, cool. So I do want to dive in. I mean, there's some of the stuff in here is just so good. So I mean, not some of it, all of it's good. But I'm working on the book I'm working on right now is I basically was looking at yours like, yes, the coaching habits, really easy to understand. You would definitely pick up in the airport. It's pleasant on the eyes. It's really easy to go through. Like, it's just I think the design of the book just across the board is great. But
thank you.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what are some of the like 1 or 2 key takeaways you think you could give everyone that is looking to get better at coaching instead of giving advice all the time?
Yeah, well, the first is that this will make your life better. Because so often when you hear coaching, you're like, okay, well, coaching is good for the other person, but what's in it for me? I mean, I quite like giving people advice. But what you find is that if you're able to slow down the rush to give advice, that if you're a typical manager or leader or just a human being interacting with other people, you end up having more impact but working less hard. And that's really powerful to see. You're empowering people, you're seeing them find their own path, but it actually saves you time and it saves you effort as well. And, the book is, as I say, as simple as I could make it, that would still be useful. So there are only 7 questions that we share in the book. But there are 8 chapters, and the first chapter is actually about habit building, because one of the things I really wanted is I want people to do things differently as a result of reading this book, not just going, I've read another book. So habits are the building blocks of behavior change. If you don't understand the science of habits and the science and art of building new habits, it's going to be really hard for you to upgrade your life, to level up. So we just, if I was going to say one thing around this, it's like, before you even get into the subtleties of coaching, figure out what it takes to change your behavior. And in the book, we talk about the new habit formula. And this is me drawing on people like Charles Duhigg, who wrote The Power of Habit, and BJ Fogg, whose website is tinyhabits.com, which is great resource. And, in the new habit formula, I go, look, 3 parts to it. When this happens, so that's the trigger, that's the situation. Instead of, that's when you identify the old way of behaving that you want to change. I will, and that's when you define a new habit that takes 60 seconds or less to complete. And, there's people can Google this because, I've written about it and people can get access to it without having to buy the book. But understanding habit building would be the starting point. And then, Eric, I would say, pick one question. It can be one of the 7 questions that I talk about in the book. It can be another question that you just love and go, I'm going to just practice using this question and make this a habit and master that. And then when you've done that, you can decide whether you want to add more questions into your repertoire. So for me, it comes back to this behavior change piece we talked about earlier, which is, look, I really want people to be curious a little bit longer, rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly. But most of us have that as a really deep, pervasive habit. It's not an easy transformation. So focus less on the content and more on the art of behavior change if you really want to make a difference.
So before we go any further, I just wanted to tell you about a problem that entrepreneurs have been coming to me with. They don't know what they need to do next to grow their business, or they don't have the right resources to execute on marketing needs. Oftentimes, they don't have a marketing strategy, or they don't know who or what to hire for. If this sounds like something that you've been dealing with, I have a solution for you. Single Grain is a growth marketing agency ran by yours truly that has worked with venture-backed startups to Fortune 500 companies to help solve their marketing issues. Our strong points are in SEO and paid advertising, and if you need help in other areas, we're always happy to tap into our network of highly vetted vendors that we can even help manage for you. So there's no need to stress yourself out trying to find the right people for the job because we've got you covered. So if you're interested in this, just go to growtheverywhere.com/help to get more information. Once again, that's growtheverywhere.com/help.
Right. So reading your thing, I mean, it's completely shifted. It's been a couple months and there's still a lot of improvement. But, I just noticed, like, when I ask people, when I approach it with a point of curiosity, when they start to figure out the answers for themselves, they start to learn on their own, like you mentioned earlier, and they just, and then you don't need to be the bottleneck anymore, right? And I think that's one of the key things. I make a lot of people on my team read the goal, and that's, about the concept of bottlenecks. So I think it's important. I guess my question to you, selfishly, I guess, is sometimes when I ask these questions, I find that I'm in a rush a lot. I talk really quickly. I find myself almost starting to interrogate them, right? And then they start to get on the defensive a little bit. So it's not so much approaching it from a position of curiosity anymore. I'm just wondering, like, have you faced that issue before, and what did you do about it?
So I'll give you a hack that might be able to help, because there is a way that tone is everything. And there is a way that sometimes you can turn these things into kind of drive-by shootings. Like, I'm just going to fire questions at you until you finally crumble. That doesn't work for anybody. So one hack, one thing you could try is at the front of all your questions, just add the phrase, so just out of curiosity. So just out of curiosity, what's on your mind? So just out of curiosity, what's the real challenge here for you? And what that does is it lightens the pressure you have to get the answer right. Because sometimes you can ask that question, which is like, I'm asking you the question, and if you get it wrong, I'm going to be disappointed because I've got an answer in my mind. But just out of curiosity, what's the real challenge here for you? Just adds a little lightness into the conversation, and you're holding the question and their answer lightly, which makes for less pressure.
I love that.
The second piece is a physical piece, which is notice what you're like physically when you're at your best. You're at your most curious, when you're like, I am rocking this conversation from this coach-like perspective. And then notice what you're like when you've kind of lost it a little bit and it starts feeling like an interrogation. Because here's the counterintuitive thing. Your body leads your brain. So if you want to get to that first state, that place of kind of more genuine curiosity, understanding what physical cues you want to send yourself will really help. And you're like, when I'm really curious, I have, my buttocks aren't tense. I sit back in my chair and I have a smile on my face. So give yourself those physical cues and you'll find yourself back into that state of mind.
So what I'm hearing is it's all about the delivery.
It's all about the delivery. And if you realize that your body leads your brain, get your body in the state it is in when it's at its best, and then your brain will go, oh, well, this is good. I understand. I'm at my best here, so I get to be curious in the best possible way.
Love it. Okay, great. Well, just working towards wrapping up here, 2 more questions from my side. So aside from your book, what's one must-read book you'd recommend to everyone?
There's so many there's so many terrible books, but there are so many really great books out there. Let me give you a book that people won't have heard of because it came out this week. And in fact, it's out in Canada. I don't think it comes out in the US for another 2 or 3 weeks. It's by my friend Mark Bowden, Bowden. It's called Truth and Lies. Mark is really, I think, the world's foremost proponent on influence and body language. He has a fantastic TEDx talk, TEDx Toronto. Mark Bowden, his company's called Truth Plane, and his new book, Truth and Lies, is the best thing he's written. So this will be, if you're curious to kind of know what people are thinking in your dating life, in your family life, in your work life, this could be a really great book for you.
Love it. Okay. And what is one new tool that you've added in the last year that's added a lot of value? So it could be like a Peloton bike or it could be like Evernote.
Yeah, honestly, the thing that's really helped me, this is kind of non-technical, is I have a chin-up bar that I've hooked up and around my office door. So when I walk into my office, I try and knock out 2 or 3 chin-ups because I'm a old, white, flabby man. So I'm like, okay, I need to get a little less flabby and a little stronger. So, I work out, I go down to my gym 3 times a week, but having the chin-up bar is just one of those environmental prompts to say, hey, do a couple of chin-ups here, and you just get better because you do it regularly.
Love it. Okay. Well, Mike, this has been fantastic. What's the best way for people to find you online?
Yeah, perfect. So look, if you're interested in the coach stuff, the coach training, boxofcrayons.com. If you're interested in the book, thecoachinghabit.com. And honestly, you can download, I think, the first 3 or 4 chapters there, and there's a bunch of other free resources you're welcome to grab. And then if you're interested in me, this is my full name, michaelbungaystanier.com. And there's a good ebook on how to be more courageous there that people can pick up.
Love it. So usually I would end the podcast right here, but I just want to kind of reiterate. So everyone, the most recommended book on here is The Hard Thing About Hard Things, but I would say this is a must read. If anybody, like most of the audience here is entrepreneurs, this is a must read in my opinion because everyone just likes to jump into advice. So go out there, get the book. The reason Mike's here is because I read the book. I really vouch for it. I think it's a game changer. So go check it out. But Mike, thanks again for doing this.
Totally my pleasure, Eric. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Growth Everywhere. If you loved what you heard, be sure to head back to growtheverywhere.com for today's show notes and a ton of additional resources. But before you go, hit the subscribe button to avoid missing out on next week's value-packed interview. Enjoy the rest of your week, and remember to take action and continue growing.